My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm standing in the back of the Riverside Community Center, watching my son Jake receive his Volunteer Appreciation Award. The applause echoes off the gymnasium walls as he shakes hands with Mayor Peterson, his smile bright under the fluorescent lights. 22 years old, fresh out of Ohio State with his business degree, already making a name for himself in our small town. Everyone's proud of him, and they should be. But my eyes aren't on Jake right now. They're on the young woman sitting 3 rows ahead of me, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a navy dress that looks too formal for her usual style. Emma Rodriguez. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 22 years old, the same age as my daughter Rachel, but Emma isn't my biological child. She's the girl I took in 20 years ago when she was barely 2, after her mother Maria showed up at my door with a heartbreaking story and a manila envelope full of letters. Emma doesn't know I'm here tonight. I told her I had a school board meeting, another one of those endless guidance counselor obligations that keep me busy. She thinks I'm reviewing student files and preparing for tomorrow's parent conferences. What she doesn't know is that 3 days ago, Detective Lisa Harper called me with information that made my world tilt sideways. Information about my late husband, David. Information that's connected to Emma in ways I never imagined, and ways that terrify me. The detective's words still ring in my ears. Mrs. Mitchell, we need to talk about your husband's volunteer work at the youth programs. Emma wasn't the only child he helped. There are others, and they're starting to come forward. 20 years ago, I thought I was saving a child. Now I'm beginning to understand that Emma might have been saving me from a truth I wasn't ready to face. And tonight, as Jake accepts his award for youth mentorship, following in what everyone believes were his father's footsteps, I'm about to discover just how deep David's secrets really went. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just about taking in someone else's child. It's about what happens when that act of kindness becomes the key that unlocks a door you never knew existed. It's about how the people we think we know best can harbor shadows that stretch back decades. And it's about how sometimes the children we protect end up being the ones who protect us. I grew up believing that good people do good things, and bad people do bad things. But life taught me that some people do both, and the good things they do in public can hide the terrible things they do in private. My husband David was beloved in Riverside. He coached Little League, organized community fundraisers, and volunteered at the youth center every weekend. When parents couldn't afford equipment for their kids, David bought it himself. When families struggled, David was the first to show up with groceries and encouragement. Everyone said the same thing about David Mitchell. That man has a heart of gold. This town is lucky to have him. I said it too. I believed it with everything in me. Until 3 days ago, when Detective Harper sat across from me in Betty's kitchen and spread photographs across the red checkered tablecloth. Photographs of children, teenagers, young adults. All of them had the same story. All of them remembered David. And all of them remembered things that made my coffee turn cold in my hands. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started. Because understanding what happened 3 days ago means understanding what happened 20 years ago, when Maria Rodriguez appeared at my door with 2-year-old Emma in her arms. It was October 2004, and the leaves were just starting to turn in Riverside. David had been working late at the youth center, something about preparing for the annual Halloween carnival. Jake was 5 then, Rachel was 3, and I was 7 months pregnant with what would have been our 3rd child. I lost that baby 2 weeks later, but in October, I was still glowing with the anticipation of expanding our family. The doorbell rang at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening. I remember because David always called when he was running late, and I'd been expecting him home by 8. When I opened the door, I found a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with tear-streaked cheeks and a toddler clinging to her neck. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" The woman, Maria, shifted the little girl to her other hip. The child had the biggest brown eyes I'd ever seen, and she was staring at me with the kind of intensity that made my heart ache. "I need to talk to you about your husband." "About David. This is Emma, and she's his daughter." The words hit me like cold water. I stood there in my doorway, one hand on my growing belly, staring at this woman and this beautiful little girl, who apparently belonged to my husband. My first instinct was to close the door, to pretend this wasn't happening, to protect the life I thought I knew. But something in Maria's eyes stopped me. It wasn't anger or spite. It was fear. Deep, bone-deep fear that I recognized because I'd seen it in the eyes of the students I counseled at Riverside High. It was the fear of someone who had nowhere else to turn. "I think you should come in," I said, stepping aside. Maria sat on my couch, Emma curled in her lap, while I made tea with shaking hands. The story she told me that night changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about David, about the man I'd promised to love and honor. She told me she'd met David when she was 17, working part-time at the concession stand during Little League games. He was friendly, encouraging, and when she mentioned she was struggling in school, he offered to help her with her homework. The tutoring sessions started innocently enough, but they didn't stay that way. "He said I was special," Maria whispered, bouncing Emma gently as the little girl began to fuss. "He said he'd never met anyone as smart as me, that I had potential. He made me feel like I mattered." I listened, my tea growing cold, as Maria described a relationship that began when she was still a minor and continued through her senior year of high school. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. High school. When she got pregnant, David panicked. He gave her money, helped her find an apartment across town, and made her promise to keep their relationship secret. He said it would destroy his family if anyone found out. He said you wouldn't understand, that you'd take Jake and Rachel away from him. He said he loved me, but he loved you too, and he couldn't choose. For 2 years, Maria had kept David's secret. She worked double shifts at a local diner, relied on her elderly grandmother for childcare, and convinced everyone in her life that Emma's father was a guy from another town who wasn't in the picture. David sent money when he could, but he never visited. He never held his daughter. He never even asked Maria what she'd named her. "I kept hoping he'd change his mind," Maria continued, tears falling freely now. "I thought maybe when Emma got older, when she could talk and he could see how amazing she was, he'd want to be part of her life. But last week, my grandmother died. She was the only family I had left, and now it's just me and Emma. I lost my job because I couldn't afford childcare, and I'm 3 months behind on rent. I don't have anyone else to turn to." She reached into her purse and pulled out the manila envelope I mentioned earlier. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in David's handwriting. Love letters, promises, apologies, and explanations that painted a picture of a man I didn't recognize. A man who was capable of carrying on a secret relationship with a teenager while coming home to his pregnant wife every night. "I'm not asking you to take care of me," Maria said, her voice stronger now. "But Emma deserves better than this. She deserves a family who can give her what she needs. David talks about you all the time in these letters. He says you're the kindest person he's ever known, that you have the biggest heart in Riverside. I'm hoping that's true." I looked at Emma, who had fallen asleep in Maria's arms, her tiny fist curled around her mother's finger. She looked like David. Not obviously, but there were similarities in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her chin. More than that, though, she looked vulnerable and innocent and deserving of love. "What are you asking me to do?" I said, though I think I already knew. "I'm moving to California. My cousin lives there, and she says she can get me work at a hotel where she's a manager. It's a chance to start over, to build a life where I'm not constantly reminded of everything that went wrong here. But I can't take Emma with me. I can barely take care of myself right now, and she needs stability. She needs a real home." Maria leaned forward, her eyes meeting mine with desperate hope. "I'm asking you to adopt her, to give her the family she deserves. I know it's crazy, asking the wife of the man who broke my heart to raise his child, but you're her best chance at a real life." The silence stretched between us while I processed what she was asking. "Adopt my husband's secret daughter. Raise the child that proved my marriage was built on lies. Explain to Jake and Rachel that they had a sister they'd never met, born from their father's betrayal." But as I looked at Emma sleeping peacefully in Maria's arms, I realized that none of this was her fault. She didn't ask to be born into this complicated, painful situation. She didn't deserve to suffer because of the choices the adults in her life had made. "I need to talk to David," I said finally. Maria's face crumpled. "He doesn't know I'm here. He doesn't know I'm leaving town. I haven't told him about my grandmother or about losing my job. He thinks everything is fine." "Well, it's not fine," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "None of this is fine. But that doesn't change the fact that Emma needs help. And you're right that she deserves better than this." I spent the rest of that night thinking, pacing the floor of my bedroom while David slept peacefully beside me, completely unaware that his secret had walked up to our front door and knocked. By morning, I'd made my decision. I didn't confront David immediately. Instead, I spent 3 days researching adoption laws, talking to lawyers, and figuring out what it would actually mean to take Emma into our family. I also spent time getting to know her, meeting Maria at the park, and watching this little girl who might become my daughter. Emma was bright and curious, quick to smile despite everything she'd been through. She called Maria Mama, and seemed to sense that something important was happening, even though she was too young to understand what. When I brought Jake and Rachel to the park to meet her, she shared her toys without being asked, and made them both laugh with her silly faces. "She's nice," Rachel announced after Emma had toddled away to chase a butterfly. "Can she come to our house?" Jake, ever the protective big brother, was more cautious. "Why doesn't she live with her mom?" he asked. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices," I told him, which was both true and completely inadequate. When I finally confronted David, it was on a Saturday morning after the kids had gone to their grandmother's house for the weekend. I spread Maria's letters across our kitchen table and waited for him to come down for breakfast. He saw them before he saw me, and the color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might pass out. "Sarah, I can explain," he started, but I held up my hand. Don't you dare try to explain this away or minimize it or tell me it's not what it looks like. I've read every letter, David. I know exactly what this is." He sank into the chair across from me, his head in his hands. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, he said, "How did you find out?" I told him about Maria's visit, about her grandmother's death, about the choice she was asking me to make. With each detail, David seemed to shrink further into himself. "She is leaving town," I continued. "She wants us to adopt Emma. She thinks we can give her a better life than she can." David looked up at me then, his eyes red with tears I didn't feel sorry for. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd think about it. But David, I need you to understand something. Whether we adopt Emma or not, our marriage is never going to be the same. You had a relationship with a teenager. You have a daughter you've never acknowledged. You've been lying to me for years about where you were, what you were doing, who you were with." "I know," he whispered. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt everyone. But Sarah, I love you. I love our family. I never meant for any of this to happen." "But it did happen," I said, "and now we have to figure out how to deal with it." The conversation that followed was the longest and most painful of our marriage. David admitted that the relationship with Maria had started when she was 17, though he insisted it hadn't become physical until after she turned 18. He claimed he'd tried to end it multiple times but couldn't bring himself to hurt her. He swore that she was the only one, that he'd never been unfaithful with anyone else. I wanted to believe him, I needed to believe him, because if I could convince myself that this was a one-time mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment that got out of hand, then maybe we could find a way through it. "I'll do whatever you want," David said as the sun began to set outside our kitchen window. "If you want me to leave, I'll leave. If you want to try counseling, we'll try counseling. If you want to adopt Emma, we'll adopt Emma. Just please don't give up on us." I looked at this man I'd been married to for 8 years, this man who'd fathered my children and promised to love me forever, and I realized I didn't know him at all. But I also realized that Emma didn't know him either, and she deserved better than to be abandoned by everyone in her life. "We're going to adopt her," I said. "Not because I forgive you, and not because this fixes anything between us. We're going to adopt her because she's innocent in all of this, and she needs a family." David's relief was visible, but I wasn't finished. But there are conditions. We tell Jake and Rachel the truth, in age-appropriate terms. We go to counseling. All of us. And David, if I ever find out that there's more you haven't told me, if there are other secrets, or other women, or other children, I will take all 3 kids and leave. Do you understand me? He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I understand. Sarah, thank you. Thank you for being willing to do this. I didn't feel thankful. I felt exhausted and betrayed, and scared. But I also felt like I was doing the right thing for Emma, and sometimes, that's all you can hold on to. The adoption process took 6 months. During that time, Maria moved to California as planned, and Emma lived with us while the legal paperwork was finalized. It was an adjustment for everyone. Jake and Rachel needed time to understand why they suddenly had a sister, and Emma needed time to feel secure in her new home. But children are remarkably resilient, and by Christmas of 2004, Emma was calling me Mama Sarah and had claimed the bedroom next to Rachel's as her own. She and Rachel became inseparable, more like twins than stepsisters, while Jake took his role as big brother to both girls very seriously. David threw himself into being the father Emma had never had. He read her bedtime stories, taught her to ride a bike, and attended every school play and parent-teacher conference. To anyone watching, we looked like a happy blended family who'd overcome adversity through love and commitment. And maybe, for a while, we were. The years that followed Emma's adoption were what I now recognize as the calm before the storm. From 2005 to 2018, we lived what appeared to be a normal family life in Riverside. David kept his promise about counseling, and we spent 2 years working through the betrayal with Dr. Robert Chen, a family therapist who specialized in trust issues and blended families. The sessions were painful but necessary, and slowly, very slowly, I began to believe that we could build something real from the wreckage of our marriage. Emma thrived in our household. She was naturally bright and curious, excelling in school and making friends easily. She had David's athletic coordination and my stubborn determination, which made her a formidable soccer player and an even more formidable negotiator when it came to bedtime and chores. Watching her grow from that scared 2-year-old into a confident, loving child felt like proof that we'd made the right choice. Jake graduated high school as valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to Ohio State. Rachel followed her own path, discovering a talent for art that led her to win several state competitions. Emma, not to be outdone by her older siblings, threw herself into every activity available, from student council to drama club to volunteer work at the local animal shelter. From the outside, we were the Mitchell family success story. David's reputation in the community only grew stronger over the years. He expanded his volunteer work, started a scholarship fund for underprivileged kids, and was eventually elected to the school board. People often commented on what a devoted father he was, how lucky Emma was to have been taken in by such a loving family. I genuinely believed we had overcome our past. David seemed like a changed man, devoted to his family and committed to making amends for his earlier mistakes. He never missed a school event, never forgot an anniversary or birthday, and treated Emma with the same love and attention he gave Jake and Rachel. When people asked about our family's story, we had a practiced response about helping a child in need, about love conquering adversity, about the importance of giving everyone a second chance. But there were small things looking back now that should have raised red flags. David was still heavily involved in youth programs, still the go-to person when families needed help or children needed mentoring. He had a special gift, everyone said, for connecting with kids who were struggling, for making them feel valued and understood. There was the summer he spent extra time with Tommy Henderson, a 13-year-old whose parents were going through a messy divorce. David would pick Tommy up for mentoring sessions that sometimes lasted hours. When I asked what they did during these sessions, David would give vague answers about building confidence and providing stability. There was 15-year-old Ashley Parker, whose mother worked double shifts at the hospital. David became her unofficial guardian, driving her to school events and helping with homework. Ashley adored him, always lighting up when he entered a room, always seeking his approval in ways that seemed more intense than a typical mentor relationship. There was Marcus Williams, a shy 16-year-old who was being bullied at school. David took him under his wing, teaching him to stand up for himself and inviting him to family barbecues. Marcus's grades improved dramatically, and his confidence soared. But he also became possessive of David's attention in ways that made me uncomfortable. When I mentioned my concerns to David, he always had reasonable explanations. "These kids needed extra support," he would say. "They came from broken homes or difficult situations, and sometimes that meant they formed stronger attachments than usual." He was just trying to fill the gaps that other adults in their lives had left empty. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Because if David was still crossing boundaries with vulnerable young people, then everything we'd built together was another lie, and I couldn't face that possibility. Emma never showed signs of inappropriate attention from David. She loved him as any daughter would love a devoted father, but their relationship always felt healthy and normal to me. She came to me with problems and questions, never seemed afraid or uncomfortable around him, and displayed none of the warning signs I'd been trained to recognize in my work as a guidance counselor. This gave me confidence that I was overthinking things, that my suspicions were just residual anxiety from discovering his affair with Maria. David had learned from his mistakes, I told myself. He was genuinely committed to being a better man. The illusion held until February 14, 2018. David had been complaining about chest pains for a few days, but he insisted it was just stress from work. He was coaching the high school basketball team through playoffs, managing his regular job at the insurance company, and dealing with some conflict on the school board about budget allocations. That Valentine's Day morning, I found him collapsed in our bathroom, clutching his chest and struggling to breathe. The paramedics said later that he'd had a massive heart attack, probably brought on by years of high blood pressure and stress that he'd been hiding from all of us. He died in the ambulance on the way to Riverside General Hospital. He was 52 years old. The funeral was standing room only. David's former players came in their letter jackets, carrying flowers and sharing stories about how he'd changed their lives. Parents spoke about his generosity and kindness, about the way he'd helped their families through difficult times. Community leaders praised his service and dedication, calling him a pillar of Riverside society. Emma was devastated. At 18, she was old enough to understand the finality of death, but young enough to feel completely lost without the man who'd been her father for most of her life. She gave a beautiful eulogy about second chances and unconditional love, about how David had taught her that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice and commitment. Jake spoke about following in his father's footsteps, about carrying on his legacy of service to the community. Rachel, too emotional to speak publicly, wrote a poem that I read on her behalf, describing David as her hero and role model. I stood at that podium, looking out at hundreds of people who'd come to honor my husband's memory, and I felt like a fraud. Not because I didn't love David or didn't appreciate the good things he'd done, but because I knew there was a part of his story that none of these people knew about. A part that I'd promised to keep secret, to protect our family's reputation and Emma's sense of security. In the months after David's death, I threw myself into single parenthood and my job at the high school. Emma was a senior, preparing for college and dealing with her grief. Jake had graduated and was working at a marketing firm in Columbus, but he came home most weekends to help with household repairs and family decisions. Rachel was a sophomore at Ohio State, studying fine arts and calling home every few days to check on Emma and me. We were managing, finding our new normal as a family of 4 instead of 5. Emma had decided to major in social work, inspired by her own experience of being helped by others and wanting to pay it forward. She was accepted to several universities but chose to stay close to home, enrolling at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, just 2 hours away. The summer before Emma started college, she began asking more questions about her early life. This wasn't unusual. She'd always been curious about her birth mother and the circumstances that brought her to our family. But her questions became more specific, more focused on David's role in her story. "I've been thinking about reaching out to Maria," she told me one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "I know she didn't want contact when I was younger, but I'm an adult now. I'd like to know more about my biological father, about why he wasn't part of my life before you adopted me." I felt my stomach clench. Emma had always known the basic facts, that her biological parents had been very young when she was born and couldn't provide the stability she needed. But we'd never told her about David's relationship with Maria, about the letters, about the real reason Maria had brought her to our door. "What's brought this on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "College applications got me thinking about identity and family history," Emma said. "And honestly, I've always wondered why Maria chose you specifically. I mean, if she just needed someone to adopt me, there are agencies for that. But she came directly to you, to our house. There had to be a reason." She was right, of course. There had been a reason, and it was a reason I'd hoped she'd never need to know. But Emma was smart and persistent, and I could see that she wasn't going to let this go. "Your father and I always planned to tell you more when you were older," I said carefully. "It's a complicated story, and we wanted to make sure you were mature enough to handle it." Emma sat down across from me at the kitchen table, her expression serious. "I'm 18 years old, Mom. I think I can handle whatever you need to tell me." So I told her. Not everything. Not the parts that would hurt her unnecessarily, but the essential truth about David's relationship with Maria, about the circumstances that led to her adoption, about the choice I'd made to take her in despite the betrayal it represented. Emma listened without interrupting, her face cycling through confusion, understanding, and finally, a kind of sad acceptance. "So David was my biological father," she said quietly. "He wasn't just a stranger who couldn't take responsibility. He was your husband, and he kept me a secret." "He made a mistake," I said, echoing the words I'd told myself for 14 years. "A big mistake that hurt everyone involved. But, Emma, taking you in wasn't about him. It was about you, about giving you the love and stability you deserved." Emma nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I understand why you did it. And I'm grateful, more grateful than I can ever express. But I need to process this. I need to understand what it means." She spent the rest of that summer researching her origins, reaching out to Maria through social media, and asking questions about David's youth work that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Not because I thought he'd done anything inappropriate with Emma, but because I was beginning to remember all those other kids he'd mentored over the years. All those special relationships that had seemed so noble at the time. Emma started college in the fall of 2018, and for 2 years, our conversations focused on her classes, her friends, and her plans for the future. She was thriving academically and socially, making the kind of connections that would serve her well in her chosen field of social work. But during her junior year, something changed. Emma's calls home became less frequent and more serious. She started asking about David's volunteer work again, about specific kids he'd mentored, about the details of his daily schedule during her childhood. "I'm taking a class on childhood trauma," she explained during one particularly intense phone call. "We're studying patterns of abuse and manipulation, and some of the things we're learning are making me think about Dad differently." My blood ran cold. "Emma, what are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything specific yet," she replied. "But I'm starting to understand that predators often hide behind reputations for helping children. They use their positions of trust to gain access to vulnerable kids, and they're very good at making everyone around them see only the good they do." She paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. During all those years Dad was mentoring kids, did you ever suspect that something wasn't right? Did you ever have concerns about his relationships with any of them?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to protect David's memory and Emma's sense of security. But looking back at all those moments when my instincts had whispered warnings that I'd chosen to ignore, I realized that my daughter deserved the truth. There were times when I wondered, I admitted. There were kids who seemed overly attached to him, relationships that felt more intense than they should have been. But he always had explanations, and I wanted to believe them. "What kinds of explanations?" Emma pressed. I told her about Tommy Henderson, about Ashley Parker, about Marcus Williams, and about all the other young people who'd seemed to worship David in ways that made me uncomfortable. I told her about the long mentoring sessions, the special trips, the way he'd position himself as the most important adult in these kids' lives. Emma was quiet for a long time after I finished talking. "Mom," she said finally, I think we need to consider the possibility that Dad was using his reputation as a way to access vulnerable children. And I think we need to find out if any of them were hurt. The conversation ended with Emma promising to be careful, to not jump to conclusions, but also to follow her instincts if she discovered anything concerning. I hung up the phone feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet once again. 2 weeks later, Emma called me with news that changed everything. I found Tommy Henderson, she said without preamble. He's 28 now, married with 2 kids, living in Cincinnati. Mom, he wants to talk to us. He says there are things about Dad that we need to know. My hands started shaking. What kinds of things? He wouldn't say over the phone. But he's not the only one. I've been reaching out to some of the other kids Dad mentored, the ones I could find on social media. 3 of them have agreed to meet with me. They all say they have stories to tell. I felt like I was going to be sick. Emma, maybe this isn't something you should be doing alone. Maybe we should involve professionals, people who know how to handle these kinds of situations. I've already thought of that, Emma said. I reached out to Detective Lisa Harper with the Riverside Police Department. She specializes in cases involving historical abuse, and she's agreed to meet with anyone who wants to come forward. Detective Harper, the woman who would, 3 days ago, sit across from me in Betty's kitchen and show me photographs that would shatter the last of my illusions about the man I'd been married to for 24 years. Mom, Emma continued, I need you to know that I'm not doing this to hurt Dad's memory or to cause problems for our family. But if he hurt people, if he used his position to abuse kids who trusted him, then staying silent makes us complicit. Those kids, they're adults now, and they deserve to have their stories heard. I knew she was right. I'd always known, deep down, that my willingness to look the other way had been about protecting myself more than protecting anyone else. I'd chosen comfort over truth, and now my courageous daughter was doing what I should have done years ago. What do you need from me? I asked. I need you to be prepared for what we might find out, Emma said. And I need you to support the people who are brave enough to come forward, even if their stories are difficult to hear. That was 6 months ago. Since then, Emma has been working with Detective Harper to contact David's former mentees, to create a safe space for anyone who wants to share their experiences, and to build a case for what increasingly looks like a pattern of predatory behavior that spanned decades. Tommy Henderson was the first to speak up. His story was heartbreaking and familiar, a tale of a troubled teenager who'd been groomed by a trusted adult who promised to help him become a better man. The mentoring sessions had gradually become something else entirely, something that left Tommy confused, ashamed, and unable to trust his own perceptions of what had happened. Ashley Parker followed, describing years of inappropriate attention that had escalated slowly, always framed as special care for a girl who needed extra support. Marcus Williams had a similar story, as did Jeremy Brooks, a young man I barely remembered who'd been part of David's basketball programs for 3 years. Each story was different in its specifics, but they all followed the same pattern. David would identify vulnerable kids, usually those from unstable homes or difficult circumstances. He'd position himself as their savior, the one adult who truly understood them. He'd build trust and dependency, creating situations where these children felt indebted to him and afraid to lose his approval. Then, gradually, he'd cross boundaries, physical contact that lasted too long, conversations that became inappropriately personal, requests for secrecy that isolated these kids from other support systems. The progression was always slow, always justified, always wrapped in language about helping them become stronger, better people. By the time Detective Harper called me 3 days ago, 7 people had come forward with similar stories about David. 7 young people whose lives had been damaged by a man everyone in Riverside remembered as a hero. Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Harper had said as she spread those photographs across the table at Betty's kitchen. I need you to understand that this investigation is ongoing. These are brave people who've chosen to speak up about something that happened when they were children. Something that shaped their entire adult lives. I looked at the faces in those photographs, some I recognized and some I didn't. All of them had been children when David knew them. All of them had trusted him. What do you need from me? I asked, echoing the question I'd asked Emma months earlier. I need you to help us understand David's patterns, his methods, his access to these kids. I need you to think back over the years and tell me about anything that seemed unusual, any red flags you might have missed or dismissed. And I need you to be prepared, she continued, for the possibility that there are more victims out there. Emma has been incredibly helpful in reaching out to people, but we're only getting started. Based on what we've learned so far, your husband had access to hundreds of children over the course of his lifetime. The weight of that statement settled over me like a heavy blanket. Hundreds of children. 24 years of marriage to a man who'd been systematically targeting and abusing the most vulnerable kids in our community. There's something else, Detective Harper said, pulling out a manila folder I hadn't noticed before. Emma asked me to show you this. It's a letter from Maria Rodriguez, Emma's birth mother. She wanted Emma to have it when she turned 18, but with everything that happened, it got lost in the system. Emma found it last month while she was researching her background. My hands trembled as I opened the letter. Maria's handwriting was the same, though more mature than it had been in those love letters from David that I'd read 20 years ago. The letter was addressed to Emma, but it contained information that changed everything I thought I knew about why Maria had really brought Emma to my door. Maria hadn't just been David's secret girlfriend. She'd been one of his victims. She'd met him when she was 15, not 17, as David had told me. The relationship had started when she was still a sophomore in high school, and it had followed the same pattern that Detective Harper had described. David had identified Maria as a vulnerable target, a girl from a poor family who was struggling academically and socially. He'd offered to help her, to tutor her, to be the supportive adult figure she was missing at home. He'd made her feel special, chosen, important. And then, slowly, he'd manipulated her into a relationship that she was too young and too confused to understand was wrong. When Maria became pregnant at 17, David had panicked not because he was worried about his marriage, but because he was worried about going to prison. Maria had started to understand by then that what had happened between them wasn't normal, wasn't healthy, and definitely wasn't legal. The reason Maria had brought Emma to me wasn't because she thought I was kind and loving, though David's letters had described me that way. It was because she'd hoped that if I knew the truth about what David was capable of, I would protect Emma from him. She thought you'd leave him, Detective Harper explained. She thought that discovering his relationship with her would be enough to make you realize he was dangerous, and that you'd take Emma and your other children and get away from him. But I hadn't left David. I'd stayed, I'd gone to counseling, I'd convinced myself that he'd changed. And in doing so, I'd given him 14 more years of access to vulnerable children. The guilt was overwhelming. All those kids who'd been hurt while I was choosing to believe David's promises of reform. All those families who'd trusted him because he appeared to be a devoted husband and father. All those years when I could have spoken up, could have investigated, could have protected people instead of protecting my own comfort. Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Harper said gently, you need to understand that this isn't your fault. David was skilled at manipulation, not just with children, but with adults too. He fooled an entire community for decades. You're not responsible for the choices he made. But I felt responsible. I felt like I'd failed every child who trusted David after Emma came into our lives. I felt like I'd failed Emma herself by allowing her to grow up loving a man who'd hurt so many other kids her age. What happens now? I asked. Now we continue investigating. We interview more potential victims. We build cases. We try to get justice for the people who were hurt. It's a long process, and it's not easy for anyone involved. Detective Harper gathered up the photographs and put them back in her folder. There's going to be a community meeting next month. We're going to present our findings to the public, give people a chance to come forward if they have information, and try to start a healing process for Riverside. The meeting is being held at the community center, she continued. Emma suggested that location because it's where David received a lot of his recognition over the years. She thought it would be appropriate for people to hear the truth in the same place where he was celebrated. That meeting is tonight. That's why I'm here, standing in the back of the gymnasium where my son Jake just received his Volunteer Appreciation Award, watching Emma sit 3 rows ahead of me in her navy dress. Jake doesn't know yet what we've discovered about his father. Neither does Rachel. Detective Harper felt it was important to complete the investigation before we involved the rest of the family, to make sure we had all the facts before we shattered their memories of the man who raised them. But tonight, after Jake accepts his award for youth mentorship, following in what everyone still believes were his father's honorable footsteps, they're going to learn the truth about David Mitchell. They're going to discover that the man they've spent 6 years grieving was responsible for hurting children in ways that will change how they see their entire childhood. Emma doesn't know I'm here. She doesn't know that I've been working with Detective Harper for the past 3 months, helping to piece together David's patterns and identify potential victims. She thinks I'm at a school board meeting, just like I told her. But I couldn't stay away tonight. My daughter, the brave young woman who'd been brought to my door 20 years ago by another one of David's victims, was about to stand up in front of our entire community and tell them the truth about a man they'd celebrated as a hero. She was about to do what I should have done years ago, what Maria had hoped I would do when she brought Emma to me in the first place. Emma was about to protect the children I had failed to protect, and I was going to be here to support her, even if she didn't know it yet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.